on this trek. Today, we talked about the provocation, We Are the Ancestors of Our Future, and we were joined by Joel from Renewal Funds. This was a phenomenal conversation, and we talked about everything from what we can do to build trust in our current systems and how we can be better ancestors to the people of the future. I cannot wait for you to watch this trek, so let's go ahead and get right on into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. Hello, my name is Maryam. I'm a 17-year-old high school senior from the suburbs of Chicago and a proud builder of the CU community, and I'll be hosting the trek on We Are the Ancestors of Our Future. Today, we're joined by some of our wonderful CU community members and special guest Joel from Renewal Funds for a trek on the topic, We Are the Ancestors of Our Future. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the word association. So then when you see your name on the screen, go ahead and introduce yourself and then give us 1 to 3 words that you associate with the topic.
Oh man, okay. This isn't giving me much time to think. That's fine. So I'm Roman. I'm a sophomore, 15 from Maryland. And I guess the words I would associate with just the phrase, we are the ancestors of our future, it's definitely true. I think it's inevitable. And I do think that it poses some sort of responsibility on us to make sure that we set a good example.
Does that mean it's time for me?
Yes, go for it.
Okay.
When you're ready.
I'm Joel. I believe that our responsibility includes laying the groundwork for a great future for the unknown numbers of people that will come after us. We have a responsibility to pay attention to our actions, our choices, what we do with our careers, our businesses, our money, our influence, and it's a super important part of citizenship.
Hey guys, my name is Jacob. I'm a junior from Long Island, New York. And when I see that phrase, we are ancestors of the future, I really do think about the responsibility, so what would be responsibility, I guess, to our descendants or people in the future that will have to blame us for whatever situation they're going through.
Hi, I'm Madison. I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, and my word association would be zoom out, because so often when you get caught up in the issues of today, social and political, it's easy to think that like the issues that are happening now have just been like affecting us and won't be a factor in the past or the future. And so it's helpful to zoom out and think about like, I don't know, just like how certain things will play out in the future.
Cool. Hey everyone, my name is Ashley. I am 17 from Vancouver, Washington. I guess I think of the words hard to process. I think humans in general are just really bad at thinking long term, and it's, it's crazy to consider that nearly everyone who will ever live hasn't been born yet. And I think I've been reading a lot about effective altruism, but just long-termism in general, the earth itself is still so young, and there's so many more people who will come, and if we don't screw it up too badly. But I think young people are just told so often that we are the future, and we don't actually think about who is after us.
I love that. Hey, I'm Gary, calling in from just outside of Illinois, Chicago, Illinois. My words are ripple effects. I think that it's easy to, on a short time scale, I think Joel's a perfect example of this, Joel, on a short time scale, to underestimate your impact. But if you keep up doing what you know is right, like over an extended period of time. Like the ripple effects are crazy.
For sure. Those are all really great words. And then my three would have to be life is cyclical. Just kind of tying into what like Ashley is saying, how like right now we're like so like focused on the future and like what we can do to change it and not thinking about how the fact that eventually we are going to be like our own ancestors and the next generation is going to look to us and to see like what we did when it was our turn to kind of change the course of the future. And so I think that's really powerful and also a little bit scary. So I'm excited to see where our conversation goes today. But yeah, does anyone have any questions or provocations that they'd like to get us started with, just based on the word association or anything that the phrase brings to mind?
Yeah, I guess this kind of reminded me when Madison was talking about zooming out. There's always something that I've like thought to myself is kind of where we stand on the human timeline. Now I know that with some things with climate change we may be curbing this, but really one of the things that stood out to me is, are we at the beginning of humanity, or are we closer to the end? And I don't mean that in some sort of like pessimistic way, but just when people look back on history, are they going to be looking back at us as these early primitive humans before whatever is ahead, or are they going to be looking back at us and being like, hey, this was only like 60 years ago, it's coming to a bit of an end. So I think yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so if anyone has like any responses to that, you can feel free to jump in at any time and go ahead and share your responses with us.
I just want to say, like, I think there's been all kinds of crises that happen when a certain way of living ends, where people are like, oh my goodness, like this will never be the same. I can imagine for people like comparing the world pre like, electronics and the internet, and then post electronics and the internet was like probably a bit traumatic even. And so I think there won't be like a very sharp end of humanity unless something catastrophic and huge happens. But I think we're always at the end of a certain type of humanity.
I mean, I think if you look at just like how long the Earth will be habitable, and how long like we could live on the Earth, and like just the fact that like like ideally like humans also like I mean like it's totally possible to find like other planets that could be habitable, and so like there's really like no end unless like we cause it, right? And I think we're like entering this time where like there have been a lot of like man-made like existential risks, right? Like just with like nuclear weapons or like AI or like like bio weapons. And so it's like I think like right now like the only reason there like an end would happen is if like just technology is advancing so rapidly, and if like humans aren't able to like use that wisely, and we like cause our own end. But like yeah, I think on on a broader scale, I think we're definitely at the beginning.
Yeah, no, I think Jacob put it interestingly that there may be a different type of humanity, and maybe 300 years from now we'll be living on a different planet. But I guess really one of the things I was more gearing towards is just I guess just the immense progress that we've seen. It always kind of almost feels like we're just at the like very end of progress. Like, okay, this is about just like how good it can get. But I imagine that every generation before us felt like that. When they invented the printing press, it's like, okay, how much better can communication really get? And so I think I was trying to kind of tie this back to how future generations are going to be looking back on us, and really their impressions of our technologies and our progress and just our livelihoods as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. I feel like a lot of the times people like to do reflections on like what the future might look like in 30 years. You're like, oh, maybe we'll have flying cars or something like this or something like that, just because it feels like we are always like constantly innovating or we're at the beginning of the end of something else and then creating something new. So I definitely see where you're coming from there, Roman. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add on to this idea of like the beginning versus the end of humanity? And if not, totally cool. We can move on to another topic.
If there's no one else, I'm
Yeah.
okay. Well, what's happened is our capacity to do damage and harm has grown exponentially, as has our capacity to do good. But then there is a question left of humans left to our own devices are building the capacity to really have an enormous impact on things that we think are precious and we assume exist right now. So that's why I raised this kind of question, because our capacities are growing. Is our wisdom growing to connect with it? Our ability to self-govern, our ability to live peacefully with each other. And that's where the risk comes. As you probably all know, we're now affecting geology itself with various of our behaviors as humans. So that's where the question came from for me.
Relating to that, I remember this quote from
Go ahead.
From Eric Weinstein, who I have some problems with, but he had this really good quote saying, at this point, we are gods, but for the wisdom. I think, we've developed through technology so many capabilities of, we could raise this entire, nation out with like a couple of atomic bombs. We could also, create an entire new way of existing like that. And so what's concerning is that now we do have the capability to do all of these things. And I think that capability is going to keep on growing. Like, what are we actually going to do with it? I think what we actually end up doing with it will determine, what's going to happen in the future, whether or not we take advantage of it or kind of let things lay low for a bit.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is that the human brain hasn't evolved, I think, as much as we would like it, or we would like to believe that it has. I think you always see this with economic crises. You go back 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the people who led to who enabled the events that happened that led to the Great Depression, they weren't thinking much differently than us. And even on the far broader scale, right? The humans that let Rome fall apart, right? All these people have been largely the same and have thought in largely the same way. Now, obviously, their capacities have been different, but I think that really one of the scary things is that we're very much the same people, and that is why we repeat our mistakes, so often. And so, I definitely think that we do have these capacities now, and I think that it is a little worrying that we don't have, or that we really are the same that we were, 6,000, 7,000 years ago. So I do think it's interesting, but.
And who are the keepers of wisdom and who the arbiters of that? And where do we go to find it?
Hey, Maryam, do you want to make that a question, like a top level question?
Yeah, I was just that.
I don't know, Joel. What do you think?
I think it's complex and it may be the ultimate challenge, because we tend to believe less now in systems that were developed by humanity over time, or developed by some parts of humanity to be the arbiters of that. We now have pretty broadly distributed version of it, and we are further empowering each other and all individuals with the power to decide what that means. I don't know how we are going to come to a shared understanding of how we derive wisdom. We know that peoples that emerged on the planet, probably through evolution from other species, had systems for how they managed things like how long do we stay in harvest in this valley? When is it time to go over the mountains to the other place? Where do we get some of this and who can we trade with? Things have complexified so dramatically at this point that it's hard to even understand what an effective global or even large regional governance system can be. And so that's part of the challenge for citizenship of modern times and going forward.
I agree that like things have gotten way more complex as time has progressed. That thing is like, unfortunately, also like faith in legacy institutions has decreased recently. Like, I think because things are so complex, we need to specialize, but we also need to trust the people that have specialized in individual things. Like, I remember, for example, like, you know, being a young kid moving to a sports team in a new town, like, you trust other people to know what's going on. You trust the coach to understand how to schedule the practice. And if you don't have that trust in the people that are specialized in a certain kind of knowledge, there's all kinds of problems that happen.
Yeah, I wanna add on to that, because I think really we talk we have these far greater capacities to do a lot of damage and to do a lot of harm. But at the same time, we also have a lot of complexity around it. And so I think one of the sort of paradoxical wonders that we've developed within the last 200 years is an immense bureaucracy, right? If you want to send off a nuke, it's not as easy as just clicking a big old button, right? It needs to go through this whole process. And there's so many thousands of people that are involved in all of these decisions. But at the same time, yeah, the more complex it gets, we need these systems to stop one person from taking, a reckless action. But at the same time, it needs to be transparent. It needs to be accountable to people. It needs to be something that, we don't just see it as this big, overwhelming entity that we can't do anything about. And so I think that finding the balance between being able to take individual action, but also having complex systems to reduce the ramifications that those individual actions may have is really where we need to strike that balance.
Definitely. I think that's a really good point. And something that you all have kind of been touching on is like this idea of trust and how we can get people to like rebuild trust in these systems. And I'm wondering if that's maybe a provocation that we want to discuss, like what future global governance systems could look like, or how we can even begin now building trust in these systems so that they are like more effective over time.
Yeah, I think that we definitely can see throughout history that we can't expect the people in these systems to be the reason why we gain trust in them again, right? Like, you can put a good person into politics, and because of the way that the system is set up, the incentives, it is almost certain, almost guaranteed that they are going to be corrupt by the system. And so, I mean, we definitely have to look to systems change that really changes everything, changes the incentive structure, what people are able to do, like legally speaking, and make sure that those rules are enforced. I know that's very vague, but basically my point is that we can't rely on the people. We have to change what is able to happen, what is not able to happen.
Is it possible we could create systems for wisdom keepers to be people that are carefully trained and have certain responsibilities to influence major choices?
It kind of reminds me of Plato's Republic, where he talks about having, the philosopher king, like the person that understands and all kinds of knowledge so they can make wise decisions. My problem with that, though, is I don't like putting too much faith in a single person to determine what's right or wrong. But we kind of do that anyways, right? But we like them to reflect our own ideas too. I think some kind of feedback loop needs to happen between us and those people that we think are wise, that we can either learn or that they can either learn from us.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I think that those are all great ideas, but unfortunately, I don't think that they're really what's going to be happening. I think, especially, so I'm French, and so I do keep up to date with a lot of things that are going on in Europe. And one of the least trusted systems in Europe is really the European Union. Very few people actually have like too much trust in it. And I mean, that's for a variety of reasons, but I think what we've seen is a lot of independence movements, and it's almost made me think about kind of what we saw in the 1700s and 1800s when people in different areas were getting tired of being ruled by kings, and so they decentralized. And I think that is something that we may see again. And I think one of the worrying things, though, that comes with that is that normally we would assume that a decentralized system would allow, it would stop one person from gaining too much power. But at the same time, when we break up these, complex systems made of thousands and thousands of experts, what you end up is you end up having populism, where you end up having groups that want to separate, but not so that they can build, or they believe that they can build a better system. But what happens is that they follow people who don't have that idea, right? And I think that one of the worrying things is that I think the more that we try to separate, the more we allow for the risk, or the greater the risk that someone who will take too much power, which is very counterintuitive, but it's something that could happen. I think that risk gets greater as we start to separate and as we start to keep away from one another.
This is all like a battle between like structure and like freedom. I remember, I think it was like Alexis de Tocqueville's like Democracy in America. It was like, like America's democracy is pretty cool, but like the coolest thing is like these small independent societies of local people coming together. I think, we can have problems with like the EU or like big systems, but I tend to, this is me myself, like not like groups or organizations, but I'll usually be cool with most people if I talk with them one-on-one for a long enough time. And so I think one problem that happens is things get too big to be not dealt with, but like interacted with on a personal basis. Like if you're trying to talk to like an entire wall, it's too big. But like if you try to talk to a single person, like that makes everything way more manageable. The problem with big institutions is that they can be too big to change, which is good because it keeps like a certain kind of expectation in place, but also it prevents things from being done sometimes.
Yeah. And so I just want to quickly talk about, I guess one of the things that I've found that may mitigate that is that we obviously understand that talking with one person, and usually this happens a lot. If you take someone from an opposing party or from an opposing political group, you can usually have a one-to-one conversation with them and find a lot of reason. But with the whole group, you're not going to be able to. And so I wonder to make these things at the same time more personal, but also less vulnerable to our own, to our own kind of emotional vulnerabilities. One of the things that I've seen that is interesting is something called a citizens assembly, where essentially you take on this very big institution, the government, by creating a whole bunch of little institutions, right? A whole bunch of assemblies where citizens come, they talk about issues, and they even draft legislation, and then they send it off to these big institutions. And so I think that having this kind of ring system almost, where you have, the big Saturn, you have a big government institution there, and then in the rings you have all these little citizens assemblies and groups like that, I think is a really good way to tackle it.
I have a friend who's building software and is selling to larger institutions, systems, government, corporations, public issues for various governing bodies that need to make decisions on. That has a mathematical system that can put together everyone's opinions and show some kind of a map of where the stronger feelings are and what the balance might be and things like that. And there will be people who figure out these different governance, at least influencers, if not decision makers. And it at least provides a sense that is more empowering. If we have people that feel empowered more, that they actually have some kind of voice to influence things, that tends to help. And then I got to throw in, if we move to 8 billion people here shortly, 2.7 billion when I was born, we'll hit 10 billion in your lifetimes. The complexity multiplies.
It's crazy. All right, so we talked about building trust in systems. What can we do as individuals, very practically, in our day-to-day lives to be better ancestors?
So I can just say, coming from like a background of like being in sports and stuff, there's always been like a trade-off between the upperclassmen and the lowerclassmen. For, you know, when the upperclassmen graduate, you're gonna have to be a captain of the team. And so I've realized, you know, to be a good captain of the team, you need to be cultured. You need to understand, you know, how things go. So I think as people who are going to inherit the culture from people before us and then give it off to people after us, our descendants, I think it's important that we as individuals be better ancestors, have a complete knowledge of like what has happened and where we want to go.
So kind of adding on that, Jacob, I think what you're talking about is you really want to document the culture and the processes. I think part of it is like, I mean, like I think about wisdom practices. Like I think a lot of transmission of wisdom happens through like culture and religion, and like, you know, when we look back in the past, like there was so much like oral storytelling and like just intergenerational partnership that like often doesn't show up as much anymore these days. And so like I guess I think a lot about like how do we like document what we do, how do we like engage in more of those intergenerational partnerships. Yeah, like I think that's a really big part of it.
Yeah, so to answer this question, I think a couple things come to mind. The first is like obviously doing things that don't actively sabotage the well-being of people in the future, and a lot of that is like comes down to like environmental stuff. So like be mindful of like your diet and you know, how much, you know, your transportation, like little things like that. And I think that's pretty obvious. But second is also like not actively contributing to the major issues that are happening right now. So the best example I can think of is like political polarization. So what's happening right now in like Congress and the Senate is that bills literally can't get passed that would ensure our well-being both now and in the future, because political polarization is so bad. And so if you can not contribute to the issues that are happening right now, it will actually help you and I guess other people in the future as well.
Yeah, I guess. Oh, here, Jacob, if you want to go ahead. Okay. I was gonna say, I think definitely one of the important things would be to kind of live every day like you're human, but also to live on the longer term and throughout your entire life as if, not as if you were being watched, but as if it was being remembered. Because I think that we do need to remember that we're all human and that we're going to make mistakes, and that is something that we should carry on, because I do think that it's just a part of the human condition. But at the same time, I think that it's important to, you know, live any sort of long-term period of life to always think about how you're going to be remembered, and to be remembered in a positive way, to have done something to contribute to change for the future, to have done something to limit the things that are stopping change in the future. And yeah, just to live life like it's being written down, and like you're going to be remembered.
Live it as if it matters.
And live it to be remembered in a good way, not for a bad way. Because you make all kinds of change if you wanted to, right? But you want to be remembered for making the future better, for creating opportunity, I guess. I was talking to a rabbi at a local synagogue. He told me that, you know, the highest mitzvah there's like an order of 6 of them, is to creating opportunities for others. And so I think the best thing we can do to, you know, as ancestors of the future is to create the most possible opportunities for people in the future, because we already do live off of the backs of people before us, right? We're using the internet right now, and it took people thousands of hours to get a system like this up, and like millions of hours really, to get a system like this up and running. So we need to be thankful for what they've done, and then also contribute so that people in the future can be thankful for what we've done.
I'd like to mention one of the answers to this question for me is that there is an art and science, there are practitioners, and there's an important body of work to do throughout our lifetimes where we work on our psychological, emotional, and spiritual skills. And we can do those with our friends, we can do it ourselves, we can do it reading, there's all kinds of ways. But there's a profession, there are a number of professions that actually become expert at how to help us advance and evolve as psychological, emotional, and spiritual beings. And they range from religions to science to medicine or medical worlds and experiential worlds, plant medicines. There are many, many ways, but these practices are super important, and making a commitment to them, at least for myself, I feel has made me a much happier and more functional person that is less able to fall in the ditch. So I believe it's really important and valuable.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up, because I think that a lot of the times, like on an individual level, is something that's dismissed unless like it's something that you're actively doing, like some sort of practice, as in like, oh, unless you're not like recycling or things like that. But I think that like taking care of yourself as like an individual, and like not self-care in the sense that you're like, oh, I'll put on a face mask or something like that, but like deeply self-care of, like you're talking about this like psychological, emotional, spiritual, mental, all of those aspects. I think they're so undervalued in this discussion, but I think it's like important to remember that like this is a long-term process. Like we are not going anywhere, and if we're like fighting the fight, it's going to be like for the rest of our lives. Like these are issues that aren't really going away anytime soon, and so like taking care of ourselves in that aspect is something that's super important. So I love that you brought up.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I think in the long term, like I think our goal is really to enable flourishing, right? Like really help people have the resources they need to realize their full potential. And I think what we don't realize is like flourishing really starts at the smallest scales, and part of that is modeling it for ourselves, so our ancestors can kind of be able to see that and kind of like take it for their own, right? And so I just like deeply agree with kind of the idea that so much of it starts with really embodying what it means to live a good life, and and to just serve as like a role model for what could be possible.
Definitely. And so we have like maybe like a couple minutes for a question before we end and go into our reflection, but I was wondering if we wanted to talk about maybe things that all of us might want to commit to, things that we might want to like do in our future as like future action steps, maybe actions of self-care that we want to do. But I know that we did this once in a trek, and it was really nice just to like talk it through with other people after going through this experience of this trek together. So just throwing it out there as a potential thing that we could discuss, but obviously no pressure at all if we want to go in a different direction. So how does everyone feel about that? Would we like to discuss it?
That'd be great. We should do that.
Okay, perfect. Does anyone want to get us started?
I would say that I think one of the most impactful things that we can do is limit our interaction with systems that are really taking away from future opportunities. And so I think maybe a good example would be, if you can get an electric car, right? I don't like
Roman, can you hear us? You're frozen for us right now. Okay, I'll send him a message in chat. Okay, hopefully he comes back soon. And like he's able to finish his statement, but if we want, we can hop in with someone else as well while we're waiting for him. If anyone would like to share. Would anyone like to share?
All right, I guess I'll pop in here, especially wait for Roman to return. So I read this good quote in the book. I just saw the quote, not in the book. So like everything is PR or public relations. So what I've realized as I'm getting older and being a bigger figure at my high school is that like everything you do like gets realized by other people. And so I think like the butterfly effect, like a small little nod at somebody can make their day, and that have like all kinds of untold implications in the future. I think of like trying to make sure that I'm completely intentional and do as much good as like, it sounds kind of corny, it sounds like really standard self-help stuff, but I think there's this element, I think it's a certain kind of meditation. I was doing a John Vervaeke meditation. He talked about this, about realizing the moreness of things. Realizing the potential that every person that you have an interaction with, the people you don't even know, like realizing that like how much they could possibly do in the future, and then doing your best to enable that, like we said before, whether it's like by starting a small conversation when you're waiting in line, or by helping people out organize papers. I think going the extra mile to help other people will have all kinds of great implications in the future.
Right on. Well, I'm 66. I live on my friend's kidney. I know that my job is to pass on, catalyze, inspire every possible way that I can while I still am conscious and breathing. That's my commitment.
That's wonderful. And like, thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, even just like being here and taking the time to like talk to us about this topic and like inspire this conversation. I feel like you're out here living your motto every single day. And I think that's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Joel's actually a big I met Joel like sometime in like 2018, I think, sometime in 2018. And this was like when I was like midway into my like, what do? I don't feel like I'm doing enough while at Google. And reading Joel's book, which I'll send some copies around shortly, really motivated me. I was like, wow, like Joel went through a very similar situation when he was growing up. And, if CU has been at all, helpful for any of you, you can, in many ways, attribute Joel's influence to it. It's amazing, like how little, I guess, interactions that you have can change your life and change and how you can change other people's lives. But to answer my own question, I started to eat less meat a month ago.
Some bad news was the information that Zoom is one of the most damaging things we can do to the climate. That was a bummer day.
I'm confused.
Wait, Zoom is bad for the climate?
Apparently, the amount of energy that it requires, especially when we're on camera, is enormous.
Wow.
Same with the
Bummer, huh?
Bitcoin's really bad as well.
I heard people like you suck all the energy out from like the power companies to mine their Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Also said, like, if anything, Gary, like, you've enabled this entire community to get started. Like, think about that, man. Like, think of how, like, all of us get to know each other now because you took some initiative there. So I just want to say, thank you to Joel for, I guess, for inspiring Gary, giving that little nudge when he had that crisis. But I mean, think about that.
Yeah. Joel, do you want to talk about your mushroom analogy?
Just remind me one more sentence on that.
Mycelium.
How mycelium spread.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know if you were talking psychedelics or you were.
Yeah. Well, I guess you can go many ways.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. I won't go there. But okay. So the way that the mushroom spreads is through spores that come out of the fruiting body. And they are so light and tiny that they can go all over the world on the winds and things like that. And there are some cosmic philosophers who suggest they may have come from other planets to seed consciousness and life on Earth. I don't need to go that far. I'll just note that they're a very interesting fruiting body. The largest creature on the planet is a 270-mile wide mushroom in Oregon, apparently. And these things are responsible to help break down plant material and create soil, and they do a lot of things. They are a fascinating sub-dimension of life on the planet that's not so well understood, and they have all kinds of properties. But this business of they can put stuff out into the air that will travel broadly and seed in other places, I find like what good ideas can do, or good conversation, or models of how we live our lives and things like that. Was that it, Gary?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, and then before the pandemic, Joel was both doing virtual podcast type stuff, but also flying around the world, which is really cool. I remember you were in Australia one day,
Yeah.
and then it's really, so Joel's mycelium spores are all over, and he's built this amazing almost social impact leadership ecosystem over the years, and just how many communities have been created by people that he has inspired. I think that really showed me the possibilities.
And that takes us to a gardener metaphor, and I hope that we're all gardeners of what we think matters. That's one of the greatest ways to influence things is ideas and a little bit of effort to help launch new ideas, like Gary's doing here with this program. Can influence all kinds of people and for many, many years in ways that will not be tracked.
I love that metaphor. That's one of my favorite ones that I kind of came across in CU. It's just tending to our garden and thinking about our own community as a garden that we can support and help with flourishing and taking care of. So I absolutely love that. Thank you for bringing that up too. Yeah. Okay. I think it's getting to that time for our reflection application section. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to add on before we kind of close up our discussion section for today? Yeah, Jacob, go for it.
I think garden is a great word. I want to add another word that kind of has a similar function. It's the word culture. There's a culture the greater sense, which is the total sum of a civilization and the way that it functions. But I mean more culture, a culture of bacterium in a petri dish, where you create the little culture, and if you nourish it, then it grows, and then it can do all kinds of things after that. And I think, being the person that puts a little bit of effort to get the water and the culture in the petri dish and then nourishes so that it can grow, that's what creates all those new opportunities in the future. Yeah, just that.
Also, this is unrelated, but I will also jump in that in terms of future action stuff, I've been thinking a lot about, I think one of the biggest, action steps that a lot of young people have to decide is like what are we going to do with the rest of our lives, and like what careers do you want to go into, like even for me, like I've been thinking a lot about like gap year plans lately, and like what comes after the gap year, and like what, like I just don't know. And I think in terms like, and like I think it's important for us to think about future action steps when it comes to like careers, because on average people spend like 80,000 hours in their career, and that is like a lot of opportunity to create impact. But I think so often we're just funneled into university and then like the next thing, and we never stop to consider like where like what is our U-shaped hole, and how can we like make that U-shaped hole like feasible for us to actually like engage in. So I don't have a big takeaway there. Like that's just something I've been thinking a lot about. Yeah, in terms of like, I think one of the biggest decisions I need to make.
That's beautiful, and we have enormous potential.
We really do. And I'm also confident that every single one of us like is just going to do so many great things. And maybe this conversation is a starting point for some of you on here to go out and do even more wonderful things. But it makes me really excited just to have this conversation. But yeah, for our reflection, anyone can start, so it doesn't have to be in the order that you see your name on screen. And I'll give you all a chance to think about it, and I'll share mine first. I think that something that this conversation really made me reflect on, first of all, was this idea of self-care we talked a little bit about, but I think that it's something that in like activism spaces or just like communities that are normally having these dialogues, very like not heard of. And when it is, it's not really valued as like a genuine action step or like something that's important in like the fight for our future. Oh, yeah. And the document with all of our notes in the chat, if you'd like to take a look at it to refresh your memory on what we talked about. But yeah, I just think this idea of self-care is super important. And then also tying it into Ashley's idea about the future, we have a lot of potential. And I think one form of self-care is doing something that uses our potential for a form of good, and that like is not only like mentally like stimulating, but also something that we feel passionate for and like about, and not just kind of being pushed into something that we're not necessarily going to thrive in. So that's my reflection.
Yeah, and mine, I guess, is kind of an answer to the above question, but it's just pretty generalized. I think like the best way to become like the best like ancestor of the future is to like directly invest in people, as we kind of talked about, and help them become the best versions of themselves. And it makes me kind of think that like people like teachers are the true architects of the future, not politicians. Like people who are just like a lot of times just like signaling that they're making change. But the people like teachers who are like actually like I will always remember the names of my teachers, and I will always like my world will forever be impacted by that. And so it's really cool to have that paradigm shift of like what real impact looks like versus what we pretend like makes the most impact.
I think that point about teachers was amazing. Actually, like that's a really good bridge to make between the two ideas. Like seeing like, you know, the way that Joel's ideas have rubbed off in Gary, and then Gary's created this environment. I speak a bit slower. But like the way that people's ideas have rubbed off on each other, it was like this great chain of causality all the way through. And like realizing that to be a better ancestor, I need to take more ownership of everything that I do and how that can affect things down the line. It's kind of frightening to realize how much responsibility I really do have. And so I think being more cognizant of that as I go forwards.
Yeah, something I thought about through this amazing conversation was that it's really important to live a life where history, well, I mean, to live a moral life, and a life that it's easy for other people to judge it as commendable, because I'm sure all of us will be doing great things in the future, but imagine you do get a following, or imagine you have a bunch of people that look up to you, and imagine like how disheartened the people that follow you would be if you were not who they thought you were, right? And I think that happens a lot. So I guess it's never too early to be a good person. Also because for probably mostly for the better, people are looking into people's pasts when they're running for office and stuff.
Okay, that said, I think there's a difference between being a good person and being perfect, and I guess I almost wonder I think it's less about making sure you have that perfect past and never making any mistakes, but more about I don't know, embodying wisdom practices that help help people I don't know, just being transparent about these actions, being willing to talk to people about it and reflect and grow and change, I think is almost what's more important. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess my reflection is I really loved what Joel said earlier about creating support structures for wisdom keepers. And it makes me kind of think about just are our current systems for transmitting knowledge and values good enough right now? I don't think school I think school is where this is supposed to happen. I don't think school is where it does happen. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the role of teachers to shift. And so I don't know, I think that's a question I'm interested in, is how does our education system need to change to better reflect what we need?
Is it me? Okay, I'll go. So I think this conversation is bringing me to a new golden rule, so to speak, which of course is do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, which is pretty self-focused. And I'd like to suggest do less harm, do more good, and be teachers with our actions.
Wow, I never thought about how the golden rule is self-centered before. That's the first time I've ever even thought about that. I love your revised version of it too. That's really, really interesting for sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. We can stop screen sharing perfectly. And I just want to say a huge thank you all for this conversation. And then Joel, since you're joining us on the track for the first time, how was your experience? How'd you like it?
When can I come back?
We'd love to have you anytime. You are more than welcome.
I really loved it. It's a great format, or you're trained up at how to do this kind of process well. Really excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, we loved having you, and we would absolutely love to have you back for another trek. Just let us know the time and the place. We'll be there. Thank you.
Awesome. I will wait. For the signal, and I'll make a date.
Thank you. Okay. Well.
Yeah.
No. Feel free.
Well, just 1 minute to hear. So, are you? Who are you? How did you? 5 people. What is this?
Yeah. So I can, I guess, talk a little bit about how I came to be here in this moment. So I'm not sure how much you know about Civics Unplugged, but they ran the first fellowship last year, and
okay.
me, Madison, and Ashley were all part of that fellowship. And so we became builders of the community, contribute. And now Jacob is a fellow in this year's cycle of the fellowship. And so these treks are discussions that we have for any of our community members from fellows from last year and this year. We have them like almost every day of the week on different topics so that we can just kind of come together and discuss things that are important and that are most likely not being talked about or not being talked about enough. And so, yeah, we just come and we talk about these conversations, and they're really great.
Beautiful. I suspect you're breathing in mushroom spores.
Maybe.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're excited to have you back soon. Thanks everyone for your time today, and have a great rest of your day and week.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Bye.